Hi there, this is S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com. Today I'm going to talk about religiosity and its health benefits. A famous advertisement by British humanists on the side of London buses reads, "There's probably no God. Now stop worrying and enjoy yourself." Should people pay attention? The percentage of people who do not identify with a religious institution or who consider themselves atheist or agnostic has increased in recent years in some highly developed secular countries. Researchers have found that people from economically developed countries are moving away from their religions. In the United States, the Gallup poll has found that the belief in God has decreased from 96% in 1944 to 86% in 2014. 86% is relatively high, given that the belief in God in other wealthy countries, as gauged by the latest sample available from the World Values Survey. Believers in God in Australia are at 65%, China 19%, Germany, 65%, Japan, 59%, and Sweden, 45%. Note, of course, that China is atheist, running by an atheist government, and they squelch religion in many instances. These numbers, however, are far below those in wealthy countries, less wealthy countries, such as Colombia, Brazil, and Nigeria, which are collectively at 99% or over. Despite growing trends towards atheism in some societies, there have been relatively few studies of the influence of atheism on mental health, according to Whitley. Yet, such studies are warranted given the growing influence of new atheists, such as Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, and Daniel Dennett. They lead the pack of new atheists and have been called the four horsemen of atheism in a reference to the book of Revelation and the four horsemen there of the apocalypse. They have collectively sold millions of books over the past few decades. Richard Dawkins considers people of faith to be delusional and neurotic. Whitley further points out the way Richard Dawkins claims that faith qualifies as one of the world's great evils, a mental illness comparable to the smallpox virus, but harder to eradicate. Given such assertions, Whitley suggests social scientists and psychiatrists have a socio-moral imperative to examine atheism and its relationship to mental health. The intention of this video is to offer a brief summary of research studies that have identified relationships between atheism, religiosity, and a variety of health and behavioral issues. I'll also focus on distinguishing extrinsic from intrinsic religiosity and the benefits associated with each. Atheism has its drawbacks. Several decades ago, researchers found that suicide rates are lower in religious countries than in secular countries. References include Stack and Brault. More recently, Dervick and colleagues in 2004 compared depressed inpatients, finding that the religiously unaffiliated had significantly more lifetime suicide attempts and more first-degree relatives who had committed suicide than subjects who endorsed a religious affiliation. The religious affiliation further had greater moral objections to suicide and lower aggression levels. Wu, Wang, and Jia conducted a meta-analysis of 2,339 suicide cases and 5,252 comparison participants, finding that religion offered an overall protective effect. Sub-analyses further indicated protective effects of religiosity against suicide in Western cultures, in older populations, and in areas with greater religious homogeneity. Religious homogeneity refers to a place in which one religion is predominant, such as in the United States, where Christianity is predominant. According to a report by the National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse, adults and teens who consider religion very important and who attend religious services weekly or more often are far less likely to smoke, drink, or use illicit drugs. Those battling drugs who participate in spiritually based support programs are more likely to maintain sobriety. Furthermore, adults who never attend religious services are 3 times likelier to smoke, more than 5 times likelier to have used an illicit drug other than marijuana, almost 8 times more likely to have used marijuana, and almost 7 times more likely to drink than their counterparts who attend religious services 1 or more times per week. In a survey of 5,387 young Swiss men between 2010 and 2011, Gamel and colleagues found that young men who indicated that they believe in God are less likely to smoke marijuana, take ecstasy pills, or smoke cigarettes than their atheist or agnostic counterparts. Hill and colleagues found that regular attendance in religious services, especially weekly attendance, is associated with a wide range of healthy behaviors, including preventative care use, vitamin use, infrequent bar attendance, seatbelt use, walking, strenuous exercise, sound sleep quality, never smoking, and moderate drinking. Wallace and Foreman conducted a study finding that relative to their peers, religious youth are less likely to engage in behaviors that compromise their health, such as carrying weapons, getting into fights, drinking, and driving, and are more likely to behave in ways that enhance their health, such as proper nutrition, exercise, and rest. Multivariate analyses suggest that these relationships persist even after controlling for demographic factors, and trend analyses reveal that they have existed over time. Particularly important is the finding that religious seniors have been relatively unaffected by past and recent increases in marijuana use. Religiosity has its benefits. Studies have also found that religious involvement is negatively correlated with deviant behaviors, such as sexual permissiveness, teenage pregnancy, suicide, drug abuse, alcohol use, crime and delinquent acts. Stark found in a sample of 100 mentally ill individuals, they were clearly less religious and less active in a church denomination than their non-mentally ill counterparts. Baer and Wright conducted a meta-analysis of 60 studies based on 2 questions. 1, what is the direction and magnitude of the effect of religion on crime? And 2, why have previous studies varied in their estimation of this effect? The authors found that religious beliefs and behaviors exert a moderate deterrent effect on individuals' criminal behavior. Religiosity also corresponds to better academic performance. A meta-analysis of 15 studies on the relationship between religiosity and school achievement for Black and Hispanic American youths found that religious schooling and religious commitment each had a positive effect on academic achievement and school-related behavior. Other benefits accrue for the religious. Numerous studies have found that frequent religious service is related to a 25 to 30% reduction in mortality in a variety of countries. However, the strength of these relationships may vary as a function of the culture of the participants. As an example, Yeager and colleagues conducted a study in Taiwan, finding that the frequency of religious attendance has the strongest, most consistent relationship with health outcomes. Yet, with only one exception, the relationship disappears when controls for health behaviors, prior health status, and social networks are added. In other words, the relationship isn't terribly existent if those relationships are. Previous studies have found that religious practices and frequent church attendance have been associated with higher levels of happiness and life satisfaction. Within the United States, the Pew Research Center's U.S. Religious Landscape Study differentiated respondents who identified themselves in a highly religious, praying and attending religious services at least once per week, with those who don't on several factors. Highly religious people were more likely to gather with extended families at least once per month, were very happy with life, were more likely to have volunteered, and more likely to have donated goods or time to the poor. These differences persist within a variety of religions, and after controlling for age, income, education, geographic region, marital status, and parental status. Green and Elliott used the longitudinal global social survey dataset, finding that, quote, people who identify as religious tend to report better health and happiness, regardless of religious affiliation, religious activities, work and family, social support, or financial status. However, it would be unfair to claim that there are no studies that offer counter information. For example, and one reason that we must consider when these counter studies come out is the location often is an impactful factor. For example, Shmueli and Tamir in 2007 examined the health behaviors and religiosity of Israeli Jews, finding both positive and negative outcomes. The authors state logistic regressions were used to estimate the religiosity gradient on health behavior, controlling for other personal characteristics. We found a lower prevalence of stress and smoking among religious persons. We also found that religious women exercise less than secular women, and that religious people, both men and women, are more obese than their secular counterparts. While no religiosity gradient was found with relation to the frequency of blood pressure, cholesterol, and dental checkups, religious women are less likely to undergo breast examinations and mammography. Finally, religious people generally follow a healthier dietary regime, consuming less meat, dairy products, and coffee, and much more fish. The lower smoking rates, lower levels of stress, and the healthier dietary regime are consistent with the previously shown longer life expectancy of religious people. However, obesity might become a risk factor in this community. So why is religiosity beneficial in most places? One might question why findings suggest the highly religious have better health, well-being, and social behaviors. One comprehensive literature review, recently published in Psychological Bulletin by McCullough and Willoughby, identified self-control and self-regulation as two factors. The authors found that religion promotes self-control and facilitates self-monitoring and self-regulatory strength. Religion further influences how goals are selected, pursued, and organized. McCullough and Willoughby state, religiousness seemingly points people toward goals that facilitate effective coordination of their effort within families and larger social collectives, such as religious, ethnic, or cultural groups and communities. Ultimately, it may be through religion's effects on family-oriented and socially oriented principal goals that religion obtains its small but well-replicated associations with variables such as marital stability, marital commitment, and marital satisfaction. McCullough and Willoughby define religion as cognition, affect, and behavior that arise from awareness of or perceived interaction with supernatural entities that are presumed to play an important role in human affairs. Now we should distinguish extrinsic versus intrinsic religiosity because findings by the two are distinctive. Religiosity can be distinguished by its social extrinsic aspects related to a sense of belonging, such as attendance in church services, and its personal intrinsic aspects related to a sense of meaning, such as an individual's spirituality or sense of purpose and the importance one places in God. In a meta-analysis of 147 independent studies with an N of 98,975 respondents, findings indicated religiosity is associated positively with psychological well-being. Quote, across all studies, a correlation between religiousness and depressive symptoms was negative 0.096 or adjusted negative 0.094, indicating that greater religiousness is mildly associated with fewer symptoms. The results were not moderated by gender, age, or ethnicity, but the religiousness depression association was stronger in studies involving people who were undergoing stress due to recent life events. The results were also moderated by the type of measure of religiousness used in the study, with extrinsic religious orientation and negative religious coping, such as avoiding difficulties through religious activities, blaming God for difficulties, associated with higher levels of depressive symptoms, the opposite direction of the overall findings. So what that means is when extrinsic and intrinsic are combined, we have an overall positive effect of religiosity. But when you parse out extrinsic, you find that that actually could have a negative effect on some depressive symptoms. Note the distinction between extrinsic religiosity and intrinsic religiosity. Extrinsic religiosity is sometimes detrimental, while intrinsic reaps rewards. Extrinsic religiosity focuses on the outward benefits of church attendance and a church community, while intrinsic religiosity focuses more on developing a relationship with God. Hence, when things go wrong, those who had been focusing on religiosity for its social benefits almost alone fall aside, just as those who had built their houses on sand, while those who had been focusing on developing relationships with God to strengthen their spiritual foundations persevere, just as those who had built their homes on solid foundations of rock, as in Jesus' parable. Studies suggest that researchers should distinguish the intrinsic and extrinsic forms of religiosity, as results sometimes vary. As an example, Lim and Putnam found that religious people are more satisfied with their lives because they regularly attend religious services and build social networks in their congregations. The effect of within-congregation friendship is contingent, however, on the presence of a strong religious identity. We find little evidence that other private or subjective aspects of religiosity affect life satisfaction independent of attendance and congregational friendship. Other studies have concluded that personal aspects of religiosity relate to intrinsic motivations and beliefs, and religious identity corresponds to higher levels of subjective or psychological well-being. You can refer to Greenfield, Marx, Pargament, Lawrencell, Abel, and Schwartz. Intrinsic motivation further corresponds to a sense of purpose and satisfaction with life. The authors Byrd, Hegeman, and Isle measured intrinsic religious motivations with items such as I try hard to live my life according to my religious beliefs, and I enjoy reading about my religion. Byrd and colleagues reported that measures of 3 distinct domains of intrinsic orientation, work, leisure, and religion, were administered to 161 college students, along with 4 measures of subjective well-being: satisfaction with life, purpose in life, self-efficacy, and negative effect. 4 multiple regressions were performed, one to predict each measure of subjective well-being, with the 3 intrinsic orientation scales, gender and social desirability, as the predictors in each regression. Intrinsic religiousness emerged as an independent predictor of satisfaction with life, purpose in life, and self-efficacy. Intrinsic religiousness appears to have made a unique contribution to the prediction of subjective well-being. In summary, academic and medical studies have overwhelmingly provided data suggesting the benefits of intrinsic religiosity and some support for the benefits of religiosity more generally. If intrinsic and extrinsic factors are combined into a single variable of religiosity, as in the Smith, McCullough, and Pohl study, 2003, the benefits of extrinsic religiosity vary by the study, culture, and the presence of a strong religious identity. In a culture such as the United States, where being a Christian is the norm, Christians may feel more at ease with their faith, whereas being in a culture where no faith is becoming more prevalent, such as in Northern or Western Europe, or being in a culture in which another faith is prevalent, such as in the Arab region, being a Christian may not be a comfortable choice. In fact, you might be heavily persecuted in some places of the world. Interestingly, in his book Will to Power, atheist Friedrich Nietzsche identified the benefits of religiosity in his Christian moral hypothesis over 100 years ago. These benefits are as follows. 1, it granted man an absolute value as opposed to his smallness and accidental occurrence in the flux of becoming and passing away. 2, it served the advocates of God insofar as it conceded to the world, in spite of suffering and evil, the character of perfection, including freedom. Evil appeared full of meaning. 3, it posited that man had a knowledge of absolute values, and thus adequate knowledge precisely regarding what is most important. 4, it prevented man from despising himself as man, from taking sides against life, from despairing of knowledge. It was a means of preservation. In sum, morality was the great antidote against practical and theoretical nihilism. Nietzsche exemplifies a highly intelligent man who recognized the benefits of Christianity, yet did not find the benefits compelling enough to make the transition from atheism to Christianity. Hopefully his advocates will not follow in all of his footsteps. We know Nietzsche knows the truth now. And Jesus said, and then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free, in John 8:32. So don't worry, be happy. Seeking a relationship with God makes us happy. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll choose to like and subscribe and come again. You can reach me on social media on Twitter at LEAD1225, that's lead1225, or you can reach me on my blogs at Christian-apologist.com. There I often have print versions of exactly what I'm saying here. Again, thank you. We'll come again.